Before we go on to talk some more about modern shifts, including, yes, even more details about the Northern City shift, I want to go back to the Great Vowel shift for a moment and talk about ah raising in the Great Vowel shift. So you recall that in the Great Vowel shift, E went to A, and then the previous A vowel moved up to E. That's the thing that we focus most on, probably. But also, the A vowel later on moved up to E and then to A, where it is now. So these stages are the 1500s. This is B and C around the 1600s. D is the 1700s, and this new pronunciation of face was recorded by Noah Webster in Connecticut in 1783. The thing I want to point out about this is that the mid vowel rose first, it seems, and then the low vowel rose to occupy the space, the phonetic space that had been evacuated by the eh. So in that sense, the ah seems to be pulled upwards. But if you recall in Lebov's talk, the ah raising was the thing that initiated the whole Northern Cities shift. The ah raising that came out of the gathering of people who had all kinds of different patterns of ah raising into a coalesced general ah raising pattern it seems to be the first stage of the Northern Cities shift. So this is a difference between a pull shift in the Great Vowel shift, it seems, and a push shift in the Northern Cities shift. And we'll come back to this again when we talk about movement of ah downwards in some varieties. Boberg has a nice discussion of Western New England, and now we're going to start to talk about the vowels around here that relates to the initial stages of the Northern Cities shift. So the initial stages, recall that ah raises, and it pulls ah front, and then aw goes down as well. And so this is illustrated nicely in this chart with F1 and F2. Again, F1 is related to height, and we have higher F1 values for lower vowels. And then F2 is related to positively with frontness. We have higher F2 values for higher vowels. For fronter vowels. And what you see in this chart, these are recordings of tokens that are have either aw, ah, or ah, and the ah pronunciation comes mostly before a nasal. There's this one outlier, dad, that does have a quite raised vowel, but we have raising and fronting before the nasal, and then we have a contrast between ah and aw. Here's another speaker from that same study. This is someone from up in Vermont. So the first one was Connecticut, this one's Vermont. Here we have ah and aw merged. So all the tokens that would have been either ah or aw seem to occupy the same phonetic space. We have this raising before nasals, but there's much more overlap between the nasal, the ahs following before nasals rather, and the other ahs. So this is what we might call kind of a continuous pattern of raising, where the ahs before nasals generally are higher, but not always. And then this is a pattern where there's a really categorical difference between the ahs before nasals and the ahs elsewhere. We might wonder, what is the situation around here? And we'll get some more details about that in a little bit. But I did want to show you this one sign that I came across recently just driving from UMass to Northampton in Hadley. Presumably, the person that wrote this sign has the merger between stock and stalk. In the Atlas of North American English that Lebov talked about, we have these maps of the cot-cot merger and of ah raising. And what you notice in general, the yellow dots are speakers in that survey who had a distinction between ah and aw. And then the green dots are speakers who didn't. Lots of overlap, lots of people living in the same place who pattern differently. But in general, we have more of the merging up here and less of the merging down here. Moving on to the map of raising, the red dots are for speakers who have the raising pattern where is raised before nasals, but much less so elsewhere, where the categorical pattern I talked about a minute ago. Those are the red dots. Then the green dots are the nasals highest, and then with the kind of continuous pattern that I talked about for the speaker from Vermont. And then the blue dots over here are for speakers who have the Northern City Shift general raising of ah. So we've got those speakers over in upstate New York. We have the speakers with this raising before nasals all through here, and then also some speakers with just the continuous pattern through here as well. This is a nice map that gives us a kind of similar converging information. It's from James Stanford's new book, New England English. He did an online survey of speakers, collected data through what's called Mechanical Turk, a service from Amazon. And he, with a colleague, generated maps that show, for example, the distance between lot and thought. So that's the caught difference. And you can see that this area up to the north, in general, has very little distance between those two vowels. And then down towards the south, there is more difference, especially down as we get kind of going down through Connecticut towards New York. This map, we'll talk a little bit more about Mary, Mary, Mary again today. And it's a kind of a similar map. You see that there are some instances of Mary, of distinctions amongst these three words, but for lots of speakers, they're very close, and we'll see some examples of that in just a second. So you can hear a clear distinction. This second speaker is born 50 years later in a town not too far away. So what the first speaker is from Ashfield. The second speaker was born in Shelburne. So that speaker has the merger between the vowels. Interestingly enough, the Canadian shift, this shift from of ah moving down and central, is maybe more advanced in Western Massachusetts than in Canada. So this is the quote from their paper, where using the measures that they have, it looks like it's more robust than in the Western Canada. And then going back to this notion of push and pull chains, they did an analysis of when it seemed that the changes happened, and it looks like in their data that the shifting of the ah pushed the ah vowel away in a sense. Finally, just a note on why they did use Greenfield and Springfield. They were worried that if they interviewed speakers in Amherst and Northampton, that they would find speakers who were more influenced by other areas. Some of the speakers they did interview in Greenfield and Springfield were from Amherst or Northampton, but they lumped all the speakers together. If you listen to them, you can hear some differences perhaps, but there was no differences amongst the speakers that was statistically significant in the statistical analyses that they did.